The Jewish nation is at war, and at this fateful time, we need to hear voices of truth and courage. The Machon Shilo YouTube channel is excited to present these discussions between the head of Machon Shilo, Rabbi David Bar-Hayim, and former prisoner of Zion, Jonathan Pollard.
Another issue that became a very hot topic last week was the fact that Shmuel Goldstein, the head of, I think it's Noga, I have to get the name right, Noga.
Yeah, Noga, that's right, Noga.
Yeah, which is the kind of the grid operator for Israel, made a mistake, okay? He told the truth. And you don't do that. And he said,
cannot be allowed, obviously.
No, cannot be allowed. It's unforgivable. And did he exaggerate a bit? I hope he did, but I have a lot of respect for his technical abilities. And he's a straight shooter. I mean, he doesn't make things up. And of course, the minute he said the truth about the vulnerability of our electrical system, our power system, the usual people piped up and said he was inadequate. He was incompetent. He wasn't doing a good job. All of that. And I know for a fact, because I'm involved in electrical systems here, that he's done his best to harden and make as survivable as possible the grid. He's done the best. Was it advisable for him to make statements that he did about how vulnerable we were? That's 6 of one and half a dozen of another. I mean, at least people that I know who listened to him actually got up off their couches and went and bought things, whether it was candles, oil lamps, batteries, whatever. I mean, he scared enough people to actually motivate them to take some precautions. Was it advisable from a political standpoint for him to do that? You know what? There's enough lying. Enough.
Perhaps remind everybody what exactly he said.
What he said was our system, our electrical production and delivery systems, and I'll explain that in detail in just a second, were extremely vulnerable to a Hezbollah strike or targeted campaign against them, in which either they first knock out by overwhelming our air defense systems, which everybody acknowledges they can do. I mean, a country firing 4,000 missiles a day, many of which are precision guided, can definitely overwhelm our air defense system in 24 hours or less. The air defense systems, right, we've been told, General Kochavi, the last chief of staff, made a very clear statement in the closing days of his administration at the Ministry of Defense, that in the event of a war, the civilian population in Israel will be on their own. Okay? Nobody listened to that. He made it. The Home Front Command made it. There were a lot of people that echoed and repeated what he said. And nobody said anything. Nobody reacted like, what? Are you kidding me? Why is that the case? Well, that's the case for two reasons. One is that what air defenses we do have will be guarding strategic sites around Israel, airfields, ammunition dumps, power stations, water cleaning plants, sewage treatment plants, water desalination plants, maybe even hospitals. Okay? And so in the meantime, we're on our own. You, me, everybody else, Ploni Almoni, everybody. The civilian population of Israel is on basically alone. We're alone. So why was there no response? There by the people. There should have been. Because over the past 10 years, it's been the worst kept secret that we in Israel, the army and the political establishment, allowed Hezbollah to build up a missile force of existential threat to Israel. They can accomplish with their missile force, with their conventional missile force, what a nuclear threat could produce. In effect, you knock out the power plants and you knock out all those strategic sites. Well, we're back in the Stone Age. And what the head of Noga said was, we may not recover in time. Certainly within 72 hours, we will be back in the Stone Age. Now, what will we do at that point? I don't know. You don't know. And I can guarantee you from what I know, we're not prepared for that. So that was one reason, that we allowed them to build up this threat, because of a policy called quiet for quiet. Well, we were quiet despite, 2 wars with Hezbollah over the past few years, which really didn't damage them that much, while they built up their strategic offensive force. Okay. So nobody's asking who was responsible for this. Why did we let this happen?
I think it's correct and essential that we mention who is responsible for this.
Okay. Number one,
this reality.
the army. The army.
Well, before the army, you have Ehud Barak. Ehud Barak was prime minister for less than 1 year.
Yes, but
about 24 years ago, and he decided at the following apparently orders from the the one world government in the making, backed by and egged along by the Arba Imahot, the 4 mothers, who were funded by the government of Germany, the government of Sweden, the New Israel Fund, George Soros, you name it, all the usual humanitarian do-gooders. They decided to bamboozle Israel, that we could just, the Israeli population that is, that we could just withdraw from southern Lebanon, and everything will be okay, and and there'll be an agreement, and there is an agreement, by the way, a UN resolution 1701, which states whatever it states, just meaningless words on paper,
well,
and there will be a ceasefire, and there'll be peace.
Well, that Hezbollah would basically disarm and withdraw its forces north of the Litani.
That happens all the time. That
never happened.
It happens all the time.
Yeah, absolutely.
That Shiite Islamo-Nazis disarm voluntarily.
Correct.
It's happened.
So the army
happened frequently in history.
The army tried to kind of square the circle by initiating what they call the war between wars. I don't know where they get these names. By striking Syria, Iranian positions and supply columns and supply dumps in Syria. And they've done this for 10 years. And you know what? It failed. Why? They couldn't plug all the gaps. That's why. And second of all, a lot of the precision machinery that was required to turn dumb missiles into highly precise ones basically could be carried in a small box. So with Iranian aircraft coming in, friends of mine did a simple calculation that on a 747 freighter, Iran Air freighter, which we never touched, coming into Beirut International, they could pack enough modernization kits per flight for over 1,000 missiles. A flight. So we never did anything to interfere with that. I remember seeing one picture, in fact, before I came back to Israel. This was in the United States when I was on parole. There was a picture I saw of pretty much every Iranian freighter, Air Force and a civilian, parked at a Syrian airbase, wingtip to wingtip, disgorging all make and manner of high-tech military equipment. And we didn't touch them. If we had struck that base when all those planes were on the ground, I mean, that would have been a body blow to Hezbollah and to Iran, the mullahs, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. but we didn't do anything. And those planes kept coming and back and forth and back and forth. They were never interdicted. So the army failed miserably in its war between the wars up north in Syria. The government itself, who are we looking at? Ehud Barak, yeah, no question about that. We're looking at Naftali Bennett, who did nothing whatsoever to change that policy. And we're looking, of course, at Bibi Netanyahu, who was most content to just let the sleeping bear lie. Leave him alone. Don't bother him. And the Hezbollah just went right ahead, turning dumb missiles into precision-guided missiles that could quite easily, used in numbers, overwhelm our air defenses and take out a strategic site. So the head of Noga made a terrible mistake by saying, if you'll excuse me, the emperor has no clothes. And they came down on him with a ton of bricks for telling the truth. Because a lot of people are now saying, how did this happen? Why did this happen? When I came here 4 years ago, I presented a plan to people in the Ministry of Energy. And I called it kind of like an energy island idea or a microgrid idea, where you didn't rely on a grid that could be interdicted. You had basically dispersed, hardened, and buried energy producers. I was calling for small modular nuclear reactors that did not rely on the grid, but that would supply power to places like Machon Shilo or Renana or Petah Tikva or places like this. You couldn't knock them out. They were buried and hardened too deeply. And that the grid, after being modernized, would be just used as a backup. Okay. Well, I was told that our grid was stable and survivable. And I made the mistake of taking a picture of myself standing next to a pylon, an electrical pylon, with my hand on it, and saying, I won't say where it is, and saying that if this pylon were knocked out by sabotage or by a rocket strike, there would be no electricity going to Tel Aviv. Period. They're dark. The city would go dark. And okay, nobody argued with me. Nobody. But nobody did anything about it either, subsequently. So what are we talking about in terms of our grid, not only our grid, our power system, and why is it so vulnerable? First, we're looking at the grid itself, the electrical wires and the pylons. This is kind of like the infrastructure, if you will, of the grid. And I would include within that transformers that are sometimes located at power production centers, but they're sometimes dispersed around, and you can see them in your neighborhood on top of telephone poles like structures. Those are very vulnerable because somebody with a little pistol can take them out. And certainly the transformer farms, either near a power station or independently sited, can be very easily knocked out. We do have a company in Israel that makes a very fine transformer, but we don't have a strategic reserve of them. And so I don't know how long it would take to replace any or all of them. So that's the infrastructure of the grid. The next part of it has to do with cybersecurity. That is how the grid is operated. And when you think about cybersecurity in this particular case, it's not just that we're defending ourselves from Hezbollah. We're defending ourselves against Iran, North Korea, China, and Russia, because they're all involved with cyber attacks against Israel. Okay, through the Iranians, but all these other countries are part of it, and they're very, very capable. How long will we be able to defend ourselves? Well, long enough until our enemies figure out what our defenses are, cyber defenses are, and then they'll pick us apart. Because that's just the nature of the being. Cyber defenses can last so long before they're analyzed by the enemy and neutralized. So we have the cyber problem. And then we have the power plants, lastly, the power plants themselves and their fuel supplies. Everyone knows where they are. Everyone does. And are they a target? Yeah, they're prime target. You can't miss them. And are they survivable? No. The lesson right now, if anybody is watching what's happening in Ukraine, the lesson from Ukraine is anything above ground is dead as far as power production plants are concerned. They're just dead. There's no way really to defend them from a saturation attack. As far as the fuel supply is concerned, this is a massive problem. Yes, we have coal reserves. They can be set on fire. If a Hezbollah missile comes down on a coal dump, firing phosphorus rounds, they'd set the whole thing ablaze. Good luck putting that out. The plants themselves are easily taken apart. And lastly, as far as the fuel supplies are concerned, gas, they know where the gas distribution system is. I can go on the internet right now and find out exactly where all the pipelines are that fuel our gas turbine power plants. We're not even talking about the vulnerability of our offshore oil and gas platforms, okay? We're not even talking about that. I would just want to point something out in conclusion with this. People have told me that the solar plants are the best thing for Israel. Okay, they might be. They're also the easiest thing in the world to knock out. I'm not talking about some, a group of Arab marauders, mechabolim, terrorists, running around a solar field with hammers and spray paint guns. Pretty easy to do that. I've seen studies where that's a very effective way, in fact, of knocking out a power plant. But if you have a fuel air explosive bomb, which a lot of the missiles in Hezbollah, in the Hezbollah armory are equipped with, it just takes one bomb, a fuel air explosive, right over a solar field, and you've cracked everything. You just crack it, break it. They're not that tough. So we're not even talking about a small electromagnetic pulse weapon, which the Iranians have. It can fit on a missile warhead, and that'll just short the whole field out very quickly. So it's a bunch of dead silicon, basically. So as far as the electrical grid is concerned, it's important for people to understand that we have allowed, our army and our politicians have allowed Hezbollah over a decade of time to build up a missile force capable of overwhelming our air defenses and putting us and knocking out our various strategic sites and putting us back in the Stone Age. Okay? It's important for people to understand this, because during the day after, whenever that is, we have to understand and we have to hold accountable all those who are responsible for putting us in such a vulnerable position. And as far as I'm concerned, they all deserve to go up against a wall. That's why. Because they were own goals. They were things that we relied upon them to take care of. And they didn't, out of arrogance and stupidity and the woke policy that they, since Oslo, they've inculcated in the decision-making process, in the analytical process of our military system here. So that's the electrical system, power system. And this poor guy from Noga came out with it, and he committed the most grievous sin of all. He told the truth. And he was forced to apologize and back down and say that he, well, may have misspoken. He didn't misspeak at all. And frankly, he did us all a great service by forcing us to understand that it wasn't just October 7th that showed us what harm our politicians and our army did to us. You wait and see. I want people to wait and see what happens when they're sitting in the dark without a toilet, and there's no water, and there's no idea of when these things will come back into service. I want them to remember this very well. Who's responsible for that? Because those people have to be held accountable. And I mean decisively held accountable. Because they're not going to be sitting in darkness. Oh, no, don't believe it for a second. They're all going to be nicely nestled around in their bunkers, probably with their families, riding it out. While we all, the dumb voters out here, are going to be hungry, hot, and parched. And then you remember, I want people to remember who was responsible for that. It wasn't just Bibi. It was Gallant, it was Gantz, it was Eisenkot, it was Kochavi, Halevi, Golan, all of them going back to Ehud Barak. Let's pronounce his name correctly. Ehud Barak, not Barak, Barak, which means to surrender, to retreat.
To flee.
To flee. These are the people that have to be held accountable right now, even if there's no war. And I don't wish for one, but if we can get, Hezbollah to leave southern Lebanon, but looking forward to this war, it's with great trepidation, because it all could have been avoided, all of it, if we just had an army, honestly, that was not infected with regressive, as you say, I'll use your word for it, regressive ideology. That's the problem. And that's why when the day after comes, the army from top to bottom has to be purged.